Hello everybody, this is Dr. Lisa Harris, and in this video cast we're going to be talking about key elements to consider when you're planning technology integrated activities for your students. So the main question is, what are students going to do before, during, and after they actually use the technology? And another question to ask yourself is what you're going to do before, during, and after students use the technology. So we're going to look at each one of these individually, before, during, and after technology use. Before students start on the technology integrated activity, you need to think about what they already know about the content that you're teaching, and if they need to know anything else in order to be able to successfully complete the activity that you've designed. Have you introduced the content already? Is this something they're going to use to extend their knowledge of things that you've already taught? Is this a project they're going to do that will introduce them to the content? So you need to understand where in that process of learning they are. You also need to think about what kinds of skills they have. So if you're going to have students work in groups, have they worked in groups before? Do they know how to delegate responsibility? Do they know how to communicate well in a group? Or are these skills that you're going to teach along with the content that you're teaching and along with the activity that they're going to do? Do they need to conduct any research to complete this activity? If so, do they know how to do that already? Or is that something that you're also going to need to teach them? And finally, what can students do before they begin the activity to help ensure that their time on task when they're at the computer is actually completing the activity that you want them to do? So are there things they need to do before they use the technology? Do they need to create an outline? Do they need to brainstorm ideas? Is there anything that they need to do before they actually get to the computer? This is particularly important if you're not in a one-to-one computing situation and you either are taking students to a lab, or you have to reserve computers, or you don't have one computer per student, so that you want to maximize the time that you have with the computers. So if there's anything that they can do before they get there, or before they begin the activity on the computer, then that's very helpful if you only have those computers for a very limited amount of time. I'm going to show you 3 examples of tools that you and your students can use to plan their technology activity. There are multiple tools available. You can Google project-based learning checklists, and you can get a lot of checklists that already exist. You can also find sites that allow you to create your own checklists and your own tools for planning. You can also Google graphic organizers, and there are quite a few websites and quite a few apps that allow you to create graphic organizers. So what you're looking at is a graphic organizer. I created this in PowerPoint. You can also do it in Word. It's one of the functions that already exist. So you can add more subtopics, you can add more supporting details. So if you were having students create a slideshow or a website or a digital video, you might consider having students make an outline of the things that they're going to put in that particular project before they actually begin creating the project. This is an example of a planning tool for a digital video project that was just created in Word. It allows the students to describe the scene, to describe the shot that they need to get, what audio needs to occur, what kind of effects or graphics are they going to include when they are editing this, is there dialogue and narration, and if so, they probably need to write that before they actually start to create the video, and then what transition are they going to have between the scenes. You don't necessarily need students to write down all of this information, but certainly if they have an idea of the scenes that they need to shoot, the angles that they want to shoot that from, and if there's any dialogue or audio that needs to go with that shot, those things will be very helpful before they actually started creating their video. This is an example of a tool that students can use to become team players and good collaborators when they're doing collaborative learning. This is from Dr. Ed Ellis, who has multiple books and a website related to graphic organizers and various tools that you can use to present strategies to students for how to do project-based learning and how to do collaborative learning. So after you decide what students need to do before they actually begin the technology integrated activity and before they actually sit at the device, the computer or the iPad or the Chromebook, or have the digital video camera, or whatever it is that they're doing, now is the time that you figure out what they're going to actually be doing with the technology. So what do you want them to create? A newsletter, a digital video, an infographic, a meme, whatever that is. And then what steps do students need to take to complete that project? Is it a multi-day project where you need to be sure that students stay on track throughout a longer period of time? If that's the case, you need to set milestones for students so they know they need to have a certain amount of the project completed by day 1, a certain amount completed by day 2, so that it doesn't get to be the end of the project and they haven't really completed anything. If that's the case, are these types of milestones, are you going to have them written down? Are you going to have a check sheet for students so that they can look at that as their own guide and check their own project? And then finally, have they ever used the technology before? And if not, then do you need to teach them how to use it? How are you going to do that? Do you need to provide written directions, just a demonstration? What is it that you actually need to do to ensure that students don't get hung up using the technology as opposed to actually working with the content that you want them to work with? The next thing to consider is this an individual or a group project? How many computers do you have access to? Is each student going to do their own project? If so, are you in a one-to-one environment? Do you need to reserve a lab? If you only have 10 or 5 or 3 devices available to you, are you going to put students in groups? Is it still going to be an individual project? How are you going to ensure that each student and each group member gets a turn using the device? So these are all things that you need to think about. And then how are you going to keep students on task while they're using the computer? We all know that iPads, iPhones, computers, etc. can be very distracting. And so how are you going to ensure that students are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing instead of doing something completely different? I'm going to show you a couple examples of how you can provide directions to students, and then the other things that I talked about on the last slide regarding being sure that each student has access to a computer for the appropriate amount of time, whether you're going to do individual or group work, those kinds of things. I'm going to actually talk about in another podcast related to classroom management in a technology environment. So what you're looking at here is a checklist that I created. The URL is at the bottom of this slide. This is a project-based learning site, and it allows you to select the category and then select the responsibilities. So I would give this to students and have them monitor how it is that they're moving through the project. And at the end of the project, they can look at that and be sure that they've done everything it is that they need to do. You could also conference with the student or the group if this is a group project, not necessarily every day, but to check in with them, have them bring the sheet to you and see how it is that they're moving through the project. This is an example of all the different kinds of ways that you can provide tutorials to students. So if they don't know how to use the technology or all the features of the technology, then you have a variety of ways that you can provide those directions without having to answer the same question with every single person or for every single group. So you can look at the 5 ways that you can get written or visual directions. A lot of times with apps, they're built-in tutorials. A lot of times there are also developer-provided directions that you may have to edit because you don't necessarily need for the students to know how to do everything, but that some of those things do exist. There are lots of tutorials that have already been written, so my advice is just to Google that piece of software and Google tutorial and see what you find. You can search YouTube, which I find to be very useful because you're getting a video of what it is that you want to do, not just having to read directions and trying to make sense of it. And you can certainly write your own directions using either the screenshot feature in PowerPoint or Word or the print screen feature on your keyboard. You may also want to demonstrate the software, and you can make a decision as to whether you're going to do a whole class demonstration and they're going to watch you, or you might want to teach certain students in your class to be experts in that piece of software, and then they go back and they teach their peers. So there are a variety of ways that you can handle the technology part of your project. You don't want to have the technology part overshadow the content. So you don't want students waiting on you to answer a question about how they add a slide when you really just want them to add that slide and get onto the content. For more information on how to set up a rotation schedule or how to deal with the procedural tasks like taking up and handing out computer devices, see the Classroom Management podcast for that kind of information. The final considerations you have to make are what's going to happen after students complete that technology assignment. Are you going to assess the final product, or was it more important that they went through the process? If you are going to assess it, are you going to use a rubric? Are you going to use a checklist? What elements are the most important to assess? You don't want to get caught up in looking at a project that's full of bells and whistles and is really cool looking, as opposed to looking at the content to see if the content was appropriate and if it was delivered properly. How are you going to assess that new content knowledge? Is it going to be just with this technology product? Are you going to give a test on it? Are students going to teach each other? And how are you going to facilitate that? And then finally, who's going to see that final project? It could just be you. It could be that they show it to the class, they show it to the school, you show it to parents, or you put them online and you can show it to the world, you can password protect it, but you need to know what your school policies are about uploading students' work to the web if that's something that you want to do. Research does suggest that students try harder and they do benefit if they know that more than just one person, the teacher, is going to see their final product, but this is something, again, that you have to take into consideration and figure out exactly the best way to do that. In this podcast, I presented things that you need to think about when you're designing a technology integrated activity, things that you're going to have students do before they use the technology, when they're using the technology, and after they use the technology. There's an accompanying classroom management in a technology environment videocast for additional information on teaching with technology. Thank you.